1:33 a.m. Andersen Air Force Base. The northern tip of the island of Guam, United States territory. The Pacific Ocean stretches in every direction from this headland, west to the Philippine Sea, east to the deep Pacific, north toward Japan and the Marianas chain, south toward the Caroline Islands and the equator. The base sits on the Fina limestone plateau that forms Guam's northern peninsula. Its two parallel runways oriented northeast-southwest to catch the trade winds. Its hardened aircraft shelters visible from the runway threshold as a line of reinforced concrete domes against the pre-dawn sky. Temperature 28 degrees Celsius. Wind from the northeast at 14 knots, steady. The air smells of coral and ocean. Stars brilliant overhead. The Southern Cross just clearing the southern horizon. Scorpius directly above. Andersen Air Force Base is the most strategically significant American installation in the Western Pacific. More than any other single location between Hawaii and Japan, it is the fixed expression of American power projection capability in the Indo-Pacific theater. The base from which B-52H Stratofortress bombers can reach any target in the Western Pacific within hours, from which B-1B Lancer and B-2, a Spirit aircraft stage for extended-range strikes, from which KC-135 and KC-46 tankers extend the range of every combat aircraft in the theater. Its two runways, both exceeding 3,000 meters, can simultaneously operate the full spectrum of Air Force fixed-wing aircraft. Its fuel storage system holds more than 100 million gallons of aviation fuel. Its prepositioned weapon storage holds munitions sufficient to sustain 30 days of sustained combat air operations without resupply. Andersen is not just a base. It is the logistics spine of American air power in the Western Pacific, and the People's Liberation Army has understood this for 30 years. In the hardened shelters at this hour, 3 B-52H Stratofortresses on alert posture, fully armed, cruise within 12 minutes of wheels up. 6 F-22. A Raptor fighters in their hardened aircraft shelters on the southern apron, configured for air superiority operations. 4 KC-135R Stratotankers on the tanker ramp. 2 MQ-4C Triton unmanned surveillance aircraft in their hangar spaces. And in the Air Operations Center at the base's geographic center, a hardened building designed to function under direct attack, the Night Watch team manages the Western Pacific air picture in coordination with the Joint Region Marianas Operations Staff. At the Shenzhou Garrison in Shandong Province, China, 1,300 kilometers northwest of Guam, the PLA Rocket Force's 611th Missile Brigade had completed its operational readiness certification for DF-17 hypersonic glide vehicle employment 6 months earlier. The DF-17 was not a theoretical capability. It was an operational weapon, declared combat-ready in 2019, with a range of 2,000 kilometers and a terminal profile that made it the most technically demanding intercept challenge in the American ballistic missile defense inventory. The DF-ZDF hypersonic glide vehicle, carried by the DF-17, separated from its ballistic booster at altitude, glided through the upper atmosphere at Mach 10 to Mach 12, and maneuvered laterally in its terminal approach. A flight profile that was neither a standard ballistic trajectory nor a standard cruise missile approach, but something between the two. Aerodynamic, maneuverable, and fast enough that the engagement window available to any defending system was measured in seconds rather than minutes. The 611th Brigade had positioned 6 DF-17 TEL vehicles at 3 separate launch sites in Fujian Province, 2 vehicles per site, separated by 14 kilometers, under cover of a scheduled PLA Rocket Force training exercise. 6 DF-17 missiles, 6 DF-ZF hypersonic glide vehicles, targeting package, the Andersen flight line, the fuel storage complex on the base's western perimeter, and the Air Operations Center. Alongside the DF-17 strike, the PLA Air Force's H-6K Maritime and Land Attack Regiment at Lingshui Air Base on Hainan Island had been loaded with CJ-10 land attack cruise missiles, the Chinese equivalent of the Tomahawk, turbofan-powered, terrain following at 50 meters altitude, GPS and GLONASS dual navigation, range assessed at 1,500 kilometers, warhead of 500 kilograms, 12 H-6K aircraft, each carrying 2 CJ-10 missiles on external pylons, 24 CJ-10 cruise missiles programmed for Andersen's runway threshold hardpoints, its tanker ramp, and its weapons storage facility. The H-6Ks would release their CJ-10s at approximately 800 kilometers from Guam, well outside any air defense engagement range, and turn northwest for their return to Lingshui, while their weapons flew the final 800 kilometers at Mach 0.73 independently. 24 CJ-10s arriving on Andersen 43 minutes after release, timed to arrive simultaneously with the DF-17 terminal approaches. 30 weapons total. 6 hypersonic glide vehicles from the west-northwest, 24 cruise missiles from the same bearing, 60 seconds behind. An opening DF-17 salvo to force the base's THAAD and Patriot batteries to commit their engagement radars upward and their interceptors against hypersonic tracks, followed immediately by a CJ-10 cruise missile wave arriving from the same bearing at low altitude, while the defensive radars were oriented to the upper atmosphere. They made 5 catastrophic mistakes. The first mistake: the DF-17 boost phase signature. The 6 DF-17 missiles, launched from 3 sites in Fujian Province in a staggered 12-second sequence beginning at 1:33 a.m., produced boost phase infrared signatures detected by the SBIRS constellation within 2 seconds of the first ignition. The space-based infrared system's early warning satellite covering the western Pacific was precisely positioned to observe the Fujian Province launch corridor at 1:33 a.m., a positioning that had been computed and flagged by Indo-Pacific Command's BMD watch staff 48 hours earlier, when NRO imagery showed DF-17 TEL vehicles at their Fujian launch positions. The C-2 BMC data link at Schriever Space Force Base transmitted the launch alert to Andersen Air Force Base and to the USS Lake Erie. CG-70, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser operating in BMD patrol configuration, 112 nautical miles northeast of Guam, at 1:33 a.m. and 6 seconds. 6 seconds after the first DF-17 launched, Andersen had the track picture and the BMD engagement timeline. The second mistake: the H-6K emissions. The 12 H-6K aircraft, transiting from Lingshui at medium altitude in a strike package formation, were not electronically silent. Their navigation and weapon systems were radiating. The Doppler navigation radar, the CJ-10 pre-launch seeker alignment emissions, the fire control data links between the aircraft. The E-3 Sentry AWACS from the 961st Airborne Air Control Squadron at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, operating a surveillance orbit 200 miles north of Guam since 9 p.m., had acquired the H-6K formation as a surface-to-air radar cross-section cluster at 240 nautical miles and characterized their electronic emissions as matching the H-6K strike profile within 11 minutes of the aircraft departing Lingshui. The CJ-10 release events, 24 missiles separating from 12 aircraft at 800 kilometers from Guam were detected by the E-3's radar as simultaneous large body separations at 1:34 a.m. and 42 seconds. The cruise missile threat was confirmed and on the display 39 minutes before any CJ-10 reached Guam's shoreline. The third mistake, the simultaneous arrival compression. The attack timing, DF-17 glide vehicles arriving first, CJ-10 cruise missiles arriving 60 seconds later, was designed to force the defensive radars to commit to the hypersonic tracks and then immediately pivot to a cruise missile wave arriving at low altitude from the same bearing. The 60-second gap between the DF-17 and CJ-10 arrivals was chosen to be short enough to prevent the defensive engagement radars from fully reloading between the two threat types. Against a single battery defense, 60 seconds between two threat types is a genuine engagement management challenge. Against the combined defensive architecture at Andersen and aboard the USS Lake Erie, 2 THAAD batteries, 2 PAC 3 MSE Patriot batteries, and the Lake Erie's SM-3 Block 2A, the DF-17 tracks and the CJ-10 tracks were 2 separate engagement queues assigned to 2 separate weapon systems simultaneously. The DF-17 tracks went to SM-3 Block 2A on the Lake Erie and to THAAD Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. The CJ-10 tracks went to PAC 3 MSE and to the base's CRAM Centurion systems. The 60-second compressed window between the two threat types created zero engagement interference between the two queues. They were separate problems assigned to separate solutions. The fourth mistake, the THAAD battery radar orientation. The AN/TPY-2 X-band radar that provides fire control for the THAAD battery at Andersen had been in forward-based mode, oriented northwest toward the Fujian Province launch corridor, searching for exactly this threat profile. Since the NRO imagery flagged the DF-17 TEL deployment 48 hours earlier. The THAAD battery had not been surprised. Its radar was already looking in the right direction, at the right altitude band, searching for a DF-ZF hypersonic glide vehicle. The DF-ZF's lateral maneuvering capability, the characteristic that makes it resistant to a purely ballistic intercept solution, generates a distinctive aerodynamic signature in the upper atmosphere as the vehicle maneuvers. A plasma trail and an infrared emission pattern that the AN/TPY-2 X-band radar can track with the precision of a fire control solution rather than a general surveillance track. The DF-ZF that was designed to be invisible to defending radars was, in X-band from an alert AN/TPY-2 oriented toward it, a trackable and engageable target. The fifth mistake was the fundamental PLAAF and PLA rocket force planning error that has characterized Chinese anti-access planning against Andersen for 2 decades. The assumption that a combined hypersonic and cruise missile strike could suppress Andersen's operational capability for the 48 to 72 hours required to execute a cross-strait operation before American reinforcements arrived, without accounting for the resilience mechanisms built into Andersen's operation since 2019. The Agile Combat Employment Doctrine, the Hardened Aircraft Shelter Program, the distributed fuel and munitions storage, the redundant communications and command facilities, all of these investments were made specifically because INDOPACOM's planners understood that Andersen would be a primary target in any Pacific conflict and had spent 4 years building a base that could absorb a precision strike and continue operations. The PLA was planning to strike a base configured as it existed in 2016. It was striking a base configured for 2025. At 1:33 a.m. and 12 seconds, the Andersen Air Operations Center receives the SBIRS alert and the C2 BMC track data simultaneously. The duty officer authorizes engagement and base defense condition Alpha in the same transmission. All units, Andersen. SBIRS alert, 6 DF-17 tracks inbound, bearing 315, time to THAAD engagement envelope 7 minutes. Concurrent CJ-10 tracks confirmed, 24 missiles inbound, same bearing. Base defense condition Alpha. All personnel to hardened shelters immediately. THAAD batteries, weapons free. PAC-3, weapons free on CJ-10 tracks. Lake Erie, engage DF-17 tracks, SM-3 authority. The USS Lake Erie fires first. 4 SM-3 Block 2. A missiles climb from the cruiser's VLS cells at 1:35 a.m., 1 minute and 28 seconds after the first DF-17 launched. Their trajectory computed to intercept the 6 DF-ZF glide vehicles in their mid-course phase above the atmosphere where the SM-3's kinetic vehicle can engage the hypersonic glide body before its lateral maneuvering becomes significant. The engagement geometry is the key. Above 100 kilometers altitude, the DF-ZF's aerodynamic maneuvering is constrained by the thin atmosphere. The control surfaces that provide lateral maneuverability at lower altitudes have minimal effect above 100 kilometers, and the glide vehicle's trajectory is essentially ballistic for these few minutes before it descends into the denser atmosphere. The SM-3's kinetic intercept vehicle, guided by the AN/TPY-2's precise tracking, closes on the DF-ZF glide bodies in this window of reduced maneuverability. 3 SM-3 Block 2A intercepts at altitudes between 84 and 109 kilometers above the western Pacific at 1:37 a.m. 3 DF-ZF hypersonic glide vehicles eliminated before they enter the maneuvering-capable atmospheric layer. 3 more DF-ZF vehicles descend into the upper atmosphere, 70, 60, 50 kilometers altitude, their lateral maneuvering now active, executing programmed evasion sequences that shift their approach vectors in 2-degree increments every 4 seconds. The THAAD Battery Alpha, its AN/TPY-2 tracking all 3 surviving DF-ZF vehicles in X-band, fires 6 THAAD interceptors, 2 per remaining track, at 1:38 a.m. The THAAD interceptor, a kinetic intercept vehicle accelerating to Mach 8.2 within its first stage burn, intercepts its target through a combined guidance solution that uses the AN/TPY-2's updated track, the interceptor's own infrared seeker, and a guidance algorithm that accounts for the DF-ZF's lateral maneuver pattern by leading the projected maneuver rather than reacting to it. The maneuver pattern itself, 2 degrees every 4 seconds, had been characterized from previous DF-17 test data collected by the U.S. intelligence community and incorporated into the THAAD engagement algorithm update loaded to Battery Alpha 6 months earlier. First, THAAD intercept at 43 kilometers altitude. The kinetic vehicle strikes the DF-ZF at a closing velocity exceeding Mach 20. The combined velocity of the interceptor descending and the glide vehicle ascending from below. The DF-ZF's structure disintegrates on contact. Debris scatters over 200 kilometers of western Pacific airspace. Second intercept, 41 kilometers. Third, the last surviving DF-ZF executes a 46-kilometer lateral shift 4 seconds before intercept. The largest single maneuver in the engagement sequence, its guidance system execute in maximum displacement. The first THAAD interceptor misses by 18 meters, outside the kinetic impact radius, but inside the debris field from the DF-17's own thermal protection layer fragmenting under aerodynamic stress. The second THAAD interceptor, fired on a slightly different approach vector 12 seconds after the first, achieves a direct kinetic impact at 38 kilometers altitude. 6 DF-17 hypersonic glide vehicles. 3 intercepted by SM-3 Block 2A above the atmosphere. 3 intercepted by THAAD in the upper atmosphere. 0 reached Guam's airspace. 0 reached terminal approach altitude. 0 warheads detonated. The 24 CJ-10 cruise missiles arrive at Guam's western shoreline at 2:17 a.m., 43 minutes after their H-6K launch platforms release them over the Philippine Sea. Their terrain-following profiles have carried them across the Philippine Sea at 50 meters altitude. Their GPS/GLONASS dual navigation maintaining course correction throughout the transit. They cross Guam's western coastline at 50 meters altitude, routing through the pre-programmed approach corridors that minimize their exposure to the AN/T PY-2's search volume. The two PAC-3 MSE Patriot batteries at Andersen, Battery Bravo on the northern perimeter and Battery Charlie on the southern perimeter, have been tracking the 24 inbound CJ-10 cruise missiles via the E-3 AWACS data link since 1:34 a.m. They have had 39 minutes to develop engagement solutions, assign interceptors, and position for the optimal shot geometry. 39 minutes is not a compressed engagement window. It is a full engagement preparation timeline. Battery Bravo fires 24 PAC-3 MSE interceptors in a sustained 41-second sequence against 12 CJ-10 tracks on the northern approach corridor. The PAC-3 MSE's active seeker acquires each CJ-10's body at 15 kilometers and guides to proximity detonation at 11 to 18 kilometers from the base perimeter. 18 intercepts on the first Battery Bravo salvo. 6 CJ-10 cruise missiles survive and continue inbound on the northern corridor. Battery Charlie fires 20 PAC-3 MSE against 12 CJ-10 tracks on the southern corridor. 17 intercepts. 3 survivors on the southern corridor. 9 total CJ-10 survivors from the first PAC-3 salvo, all within 14 nautical miles of Andersen's perimeter. Battery Bravo fires 12 additional PAC-3 MSE against the 6 northern corridor survivors. 5 intercepts. 1 CJ-10 survives the second Battery Bravo salvo and crosses the base perimeter fence at 50 meters altitude, its GPS guidance locked on the runway threshold aim point. The base's 3 C-RAM Centurion systems, positioned at the runway's northeast, southwest, and midfield positions, engage simultaneously. The northeast Centurion acquires the CJ-10 at 1,800 meters and fires a 1.5-second burst of 20mm tungsten at 4,500 rounds per minute. The CJ-10's turbofan section is penetrated at 1,200 meters. It loses propulsion. It impacts the runway surface 840 meters from the threshold at an angle consistent with a powerless glide rather than a controlled approach. The 500-kilogram warhead requires a controlled impact at a specific angle for initiation. The actual impact angle, 14 degrees rather than the programmed 12 degrees, does not meet the fusing conditions. The warhead does not detonate. The CJ-10 casing skids across the runway surface and comes to rest on the runway edge. It will be removed by EOD in 47 minutes. The runway is inspectable and assessed as operational. Battery Charlie fires 8 additional PAC-3MSE against the 3 Southern Corridor survivors. 3 intercepts at 7 to 11 nautical miles from the perimeter. No CJ-10 on the Southern Corridor crosses the base fence line. 2:23 a.m. 50 minutes since the first DF-17 launched from Fujian Province. 6 DFZF hypersonic glide vehicles, 3 intercepted by SM, 3 Block 2A, 3 by THAAD kinetic vehicles, 24 CJ-10 cruise missiles, 35 defeated by PAC-3MSE, 1 CJ-10 casing on the runway without warhead detonation, 0 warhead detonations on any facility, 0 aircraft damaged, 0 fuel storage affected, 0 personnel casualties. Andersen Air Force Base, operationally intact. The Air Operations Center Duty Officer transmits his post-engagement report to Indopacom and to 7th Air Force at Osen, Indopacom, Andersen. All 30 inbound tracks engaged and neutralized. 1 CJ-10 casing on runway, EOD responding, runway closed for inspection, estimated reopening 47 minutes. All aircraft and facilities intact. 0 casualties. Requesting authorization for Pacific Iron counterstrike. Time-sensitive targets in window. Pacific Iron authorization arrives from Indopacom at 2:26 a.m. At 2:27 a.m., 2 B-2A Spirit stealth bombers from the 509th Bomb Wing, both airborne from Andersen since 11:45 p.m. under the elevated threat posture tasking, their crews having heard the engagement sequences transmitted on the command net from their orbits 200 miles south of the base, received their Pacific Iron targeting data, and turned northwest toward the Chinese coast at 51,000 feet at Mach 0.87. Each B-2A carries 8 GBU-57A/B massive ordnance penetrators, the 30,000-pound bunker-busting weapon designed specifically for hardened underground facilities, in its internal weapons bay. Their targets: the 3 DF-17 TEL launch sites in Fujian Province, each of which satellite imagery had shown to be associated with underground storage tunnels used to shelter additional DF-17 missiles and guidance components between operations. At 2:29 a.m., the 3 B-52H stratofortresses on alert at Andersen launch in sequence, their 8-engine turbofans shaking the hardstand as they accelerate to rotation speed. Each B-52H carries 12 AGM-158B JASSM-ER crews, missiles internally and on external pylons, 36 JASSM-ER total across 3 aircraft. Their targets: the Lingshui Air Base H-6K Regiment on Hainan Island, the airfield from which the 12 H-6K aircraft had launched tonight's CJ-10 strike. The H-6K aircraft had recovered to Lingshui following their CJ-10 release. The E-3 Sentry had tracked their return transit and confirmed their landing at 2:02 a.m. They are on the flat line being rearmed for a second strike cycle. The JASSM-ER salvo reaches Lingshui at 3:14 a.m. 36 missiles, 12 H-6K aircraft. The park and apron, the CJ-10 storage and maintenance building, the fuel complex, the regiment command facility. Secondary detonations visible on the P-8A's FLIR sensor from its surveillance orbit over the South China Sea. The 2 B-2A Spirit bombers released their GBU-57 A/B MOPs against the 3 Fujian Province DF-17 launch sites at 3:31 a.m. 16 massive ordnance penetrators, the largest conventional bomb in the American inventory, each one weighing 13,600 kilograms, fall against the 3 tunnel entrance complexes that the NRO imagery had identified as the underground component of the DF-17 launch infrastructure. The impact energies register as 2.0 to 2.3 magnitude seismic events on the monitoring network operated by the Pacific Seismographic Network. Secondary structural collapses within the tunnel systems are confirmed by the seismic signature pattern, the distinctive double event profile of an initial penetration followed by a secondary structural failure typical of tunnel system collapse. The DF-17 storage and maintenance capability at all three Fujian sites is assessed as catastrophically degraded. By 3:44 a.m., 2 hours and 11 minutes after the first DF-17 launched from the Chinese coast, Pacific Iron is complete. Battle damage assessment. Indopacom intelligence at 6 a.m. Andersen Air Force Base. 1 CJ-10 casing on runway without warhead detonation. Runway reopened at 3:10 a.m., 57 minutes after impact. All aircraft intact. All facilities operational. 0 fuel or munitions affected. 0 personnel casualties. 3 Fujian Province DF-17 launch sites. All 3 underground storage tunnel systems assessed as catastrophically damaged by GBU-57A/B penetrating warhead impacts, surface launch infrastructure destroyed. Lingshui H-6K Regiment, 12 aircraft and CJ-10 storage destroyed with secondary detonations, fuel complex destroyed, regiment command non-functional. Estimated PLA and PLA-AF personnel casualties, 51 to 79. American losses, 0 aircraft. 0 personnel casualties. Andersen Air Force Base. Fully operational, resumed normal flight operations at 3:10 a.m. The B-52H that was on alert at 1:33 a.m. is now airborne with a full weapons load, its 8 turbofans carrying it west toward a combat air patrol station over the western Pacific at 450 knots. The F-22As are taxiing to the runway threshold for their Dawn Combat Air Patrol launch. The KC-135s are starting engines on the tanker ramp. The Air Operations Center is managing the Western Pacific air picture with the same calm precision it maintained throughout the entire engagement. Andersen Air Force Base has been the westernmost anchor of American air power in the Pacific since it was built. 30 weapons, 6 hypersonic and 24 crews were sent against it tonight and achieved 1 unexploded casing on a runway that was inspected, cleared, and reopened in 57 minutes. The PLA, Rocket Force's most advanced hypersonic weapon, and the PLA-AF's most capable land attack cruise missile combined to delay flight operations by 57 minutes. The base is open. The aircraft are flying. The Pacific is American operational airspace. It always will be.